All right, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, May 21st, 2015. And the Nefarium has been busy. Let me tell you, I'm going to get right into it because I have two articles that were sent to me, and they are really interesting and provocative. The first article is from a website called usawatchdog.com. And it's regarding these reports that many of you have been noticing. Many of you have been sending me these articles about this particular announcement or impending announcement. And I'm going to get right into it. This article starts out this way, quote, Gold expert Rob Kirby arranges deliveries of the yellow metal to his clients measured by the ton. Kirby says that news that China may disclose, listen carefully, folks, that it has 30,000 tons of gold will be devastating for the West. Kirby contends we could be fast approaching the moment when the tide is going to turn and go out, and we are going to find out who's wearing a bathing suit. I think the time is fast approaching if it is not here already. Kirby also says, I think the implied message is we are going to show you how much we have, and then you are going to have to show us how much you have. America very likely doesn't have, in my view, the gold they claim to have. They also probably spent a lot of other people's gold in safekeeping. What would happen to the US dollar if China revealed a vast holding of physical gold? Kirby contends that it would destabilize the dollar enough that it could cause a sudden drop in the US dollar, which could signal a tsunami of dollars coming back to America, and so on. Now, let me stop right there and say this is pretty typical analysis from gold bugs, all right? Now, I'm not necessarily anti-bullion and I'm not necessarily pro-bullion because I do think that people making these types of conventional arguments are a bit off track in that the mechanism of reserve currency status is not based in the modern world on gold supplies. It's based on naval power and space assets. And by far and away, the United States still controls most of those. So I'm not on the imminent panic, everything's going to collapse tomorrow. But it's interesting that he does point out this story that's been circulating around the internet that China may have up to 30,000 tons of gold. Why is that interesting? Well, if you've been following what I've been saying about the possibilities of a hidden system of finance based on World War II Nazi and Japanese loot, much of which included gold and amounts of gold far in excess of publicly stated estimates of the amounts of bullion actually in existence, this would seem to be a little confirmatory clue that there may be something going on. And if that's the case, please pay attention now. If that's the case, then the way that you would expose that hidden system of finance is to amass such an amount of gold and then reveal it to the world, and that would expose all of those Western estimates of the amounts of gold in existence, which are far below 30,000 tons, at least from the standpoint of one nation possessing that massive amount of gold. What that would do would be a little tipping point that there's another system in place, and it's that system that's actually driving Western finance. So in other words, my analysis here, folks, is very, very different from the conventional financial economic analysis. And that analysis is based on the idea that there is this hidden system of finance and that the real subject of all of these maneuvers financially between the West and the BRICS bloc is really an effort on their part to expose that system. And if they are successful in exposing it, then that will reveal the fact that the Western financial system is being driven in large part not by the public fiscal policies of Western governments, but rather by something completely different and off the books, and that's that hidden system of finance which supports all their black projects. This is, I think, what's going on here. Now, there's something else in this article that I want to turn to because it's equally important and it's happening at the same time. This is the statement later on in this article that goes like this, quote, on Secretary of State John Kerry's recent meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Kirby says, quote, I think increasingly the West is trying to finesse a very bad card hand. When you know, and interesting that he chooses the poker analogy here for what game the West is playing, all right? When you know you are playing a weakened hand, your bets are going to become less aggressive. And you're going to adopt more of a defensive posture and possibly a pleading posture. And it might get to a begging posture at some point in time. I feel they may want to find some sort of diplomatic track other than what the neocons have been prescribing all along. I think this bellicose, belligerent track leads us down a road to nothing but war. I think maybe it's beginning to hit home how real and palpable the possibilities of war are becoming. If we get war, it will be total war. This is the track the neocons have put America on and the rest of the world. Maybe they are having a come to Jesus moment. All right. Now, in other words, behind all the financial maneuvering, there is Western weakness. All right. Now, it is interesting that Kerry and incidentally, Victoria Nuland went over to Russia recently, and I might even be blogging about this more this week beyond this news and views commentary. But I want to turn now to an interesting article that was published in Russia's Sputnik, Russia's online magazine Sputnik. And this is by Pepe Escobar. And again, I want to read portions of this article because this is the Russian take on what's going on. We have to remember that Sputnik is an official owned organism, media outlet of the Russian government. All right. Now, it begins this way. So a woman walks into the room. That's how quite a few jokes usually start. In our case, the self-appointed queen of Newlandistan, Victoria FVEU, walks into a room in Moscow to talk to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov and Grigory Karasin. All right? A joke? Oh no. That's what really happened. Why? Let's start with the official reasons. Karasin qualified the talks as fruitful while stressing Moscow does not approve of Washington becoming, listen carefully folks, part of the Normandy-style Russia, Ukraine, Germany, France negotiations on the Ukraine. Not after the relentless demonization not only of the Kremlin but also of Russia as a whole since the Maidan coup. So in other words, we're being told, folks, and please, this is so significant, that as far as Moscow is concerned, the United States has absolutely no place at the negotiating table. That table they want to keep restricted to the Ukraine, to France, and to Germany. So Moscow is saying Europe's business is Europe's business, and if any powers are involved negotiating European interests in the Ukraine, it has to be France and Germany, not the United States. So in other words, Moscow's very obliquely tipping the hat that, number one, they acknowledge that those two European powers are really in the driving seat within the EU, and number two, they want them to be in the driving seat without Washington. That's a subtle way of saying, we're all for the European Union, we just don't want Washington to have any influence in it. So they're giving subtle messages here to Berlin and Paris, and my guess is Berlin and Paris are paying attention. In other words, Moscow's saying it's time for you guys to start acting like world powers and bucking all of the orders from Washington, D.C. Now, continuing with this Sputnik article, Ryabkov, for his part, made it known that the current state of U.S.-Russia relationships remains corrosive. It's crucial to remember that the Queen of Newlandistan went to Moscow only after meeting with certified Washington vassal President Poroshenko and her own hand-picked Prime Minister Yats, and that this was before accompanying Secretary of State John Kerry on the full regalia State Department trip to Sochi on May 12th. Now, further down, watch those red lines. It's crucial to notice that the Crimea does not seem to be on the table anymore. It's a fait accompli. But then there are those U.S., quote, military trainers who have been deployed to the western Ukraine only for a 6-month mission. And historical reminder, this is how Vietnam got started. For Moscow, expansion of this mission is an absolute red line. And then there's the ultimate red line, NATO expansion, which remains unabated in the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. That won't stop. It's part of NATO's obsession in solidifying a new Iron Curtain from the Baltics to the Black Sea. Thus, beyond all the talking, the next step is to watch whether the Obama administration will really refrain from weaponizing Kiev. The Ukraine, for all practical purposes, is now a massively indebted, failed state turned into an IMF colony. The EU does not want it, although NATO does. Now, let's stop, folks, right there, because this is where our analysis has to begin. I've been arguing that the United States is increasingly put in a difficult position because it knows, just as this article goes on to point out, that the real economic future is going to be this new Silk Road, this new tying together of the Eurasian landmass, including Europe, into that economic and geopolitical power structure. All right. Now, this article also goes on to point out that in Moscow's view, Europe is from Vladivostok to the Atlantic. And folks, I'm going to clue you in here, and I'm going to be saying more about this in upcoming public written works. There is a conflict here now between the Russian view of Europe being this all-encompassing Eurasian unity and Germany's view of Europe, which is a less grandiose view. It's Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. Okay, so there's going to be now a clash, a long-term clash of German and Russian geopolitics. But in the midterm, those two countries have much more in common geopolitically than they do with the West. And this is what Russia is banking on. All right. Now, notice that it stressed the division between the European Union and what they want, and that's quite true, and what NATO, in other words, Washington wants. So the other thing that's happening here is you have to understand that the recent calls for a European army are, in my opinion, the European response to all of this pressure from Washington. For them to get out of the NATO-Washington thumb, they're going to have to create a military structure that by international law is not integrated into NATO. And if they succeed in doing that, then you can take that massive military potential of Italy, France, Germany, and possibly the United Kingdom, but I doubt that. But you can still take that massive military potential and create a European army, and that army is not going to be, in my opinion, obligated by the same treaty obligations that NATO has. In other words, NATO will simply be a paper tiger, and only the United States will have any real military commitment in it. This is why, and again, I've been analyzing and suggesting this in past news and views and public blogs. This is why we see the United States pivoting very quickly, getting its bases out of Western Europe and moving them into those Eastern European countries, because this is the only remaining place in Europe where the United States has real support at a popular level, is in Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states. As far as the Europeans go, this is simply the United States trying to interdict all of those supply lines between Europe and Russia. This is a very, very dangerous geopolitical game because it puts the United States between Russia and between that potential European army. So this is going to play out, folks, over the next few years. This is one to watch. The Nefarium, like I say, I've been rather breathless trying to get through these articles, and I didn't even get through all of the Sputnik article that I wanted to talk about. But this is one to pay attention to, the financial war and the coming European army. That's it. See you on the flip side. God bless.